New vehicles are making their way onto World of Tanks console very soon, and today's video is going to look at what these vehicles are, how you can get them, and the likely things that you'll be seeing within them. And of course, on screen we're going to have some gameplay of what they're like on World of Tanks PC, because they are already released on World of Tanks PC, and that is because they are the French wheeled vehicles, and yeah, they will be coming into the game. We're going to discuss whether or not that they'll be balanced within the console version, and yeah, let's get into it. First things first, what do we need to do when thinking about the wheeled vehicles? Well, let's have a look at where they place themselves within the tech tree that currently stands on PC. So obviously they come off of the tier 5 AMX ELC BIS, which we do also have on console, and so it would be presumed that we'll also get the exact same tech tree layout where it will actually branch off of the AMX ELC BIS, and therefore we'll get the entire line consisting of 5 different new wheeled vehicles, starting with the AMD 178B. Now this is obviously the tier 6 version. It's going to be a competitor to the tier 6 French light tank, not wheeled in the AMX 12T. Obviously, on screen you can see the visual model in just a second, and this tank is actually quite an interesting one. It's basically looks pretty B-Tech, and it looks like it's not going to be any good within the game, and I guess to a degree you'd be somewhat right. It gets 65 kilometers an hour forward, and the key statistics of this vehicle is that the turret and tank traverse is actually pretty good. 35 degrees a second means that yes, you'll be able to turn quickly, and that is something that you'll notice with all of the French wheeled vehicles, is that the turning circle is absolutely insane on PC, and whether or not console will get the exact same kind of traverse speed, I don't know. We'll have to kind of wait and see, and that's the sort of things we'll have to hope that they've managed to get right, because on PC they really didn't when they first came into the game, and so yeah, I suppose there's that. Obviously, pretty mediocre gun. You've got 1571 DPM, 120 pen, very low penetration when you're coming up against tier 8s, which you'll probably be doing quite a lot in the French wheeled vehicles if you're playing tier 6. And so yeah, I think it's an interesting tank, but it's definitely not the one that you're going to be wanting in order to really have some fantastic games, because I just don't think it's going to be as competitive as the AMX 12T, which is of course the equivalent at its tier. And when you compare it to things like the Chaffee, yeah, I just don't think it will quite compare up as much as you'd probably want. Now, tier 7, we then have the Hotchkiss EBR. So this is where the tank line becomes a little bit more kind of what it's going to be like when you reach the tier 10, because the tier 6, although being somewhat similar, it is the original first tank in the tech tree for the line. And so yeah, I think that this is where it really starts to become apparent as to what you can expect with the wheeled vehicles. At tier 7, the Hotchkiss EBR is where it's at. You can go 70 kilometers an hour top speed, that's base, so whether that will be the exact same on console, and then we can obviously use the speed boost equipment if you do so wish to boost that even further. Whether or not Wargaming will take the stance of you cannot use the speed boost equipment with the wheeled vehicles, which would probably make them somewhat more balanced, because if you can use both the speed boost and the insane actual speed of the tanks themselves, yeah, you'll probably be able to reach 90 kilometers an hour in the Hotchkiss EBR, which makes them really difficult to actually take out of the game. And although they are pretty weak in terms of the armor model, because they basically have no armor, as you can see, pretty much 20 to 50 all around the entirety of the tank. One thing that I do want to mention is that if you are trying to actually take these out within the game, you don't want to be hitting the wheels, because all that does will basically wheel the tank, if that makes sense. So the wheel will stop working, you lose slight speed, but you can still keep moving with the tank, which is kind of the problem with them. And also when you do hit the wheel, often you actually go underneath and then you won't deal any damage whatsoever. So you do have that kind of problem with the wheeled light tanks, as well as the fact that they are very small within the game comparatively to the other tanks, and so trying to hit them, especially when they're doing 70 kilometers an hour base, yeah, very, very difficult. So that's kind of the key statistics of the vehicles. Obviously you get pretty decent gun depression, 10 degrees. You can use the tanks very, they're very flexible within the game. You can move around the map a lot, and that's kind of what you want these tanks for. Obviously then at tier 8 we have the Lynx 6x6. This is obviously getting further up the tech tree. We're going to be seeing more and more alpha damage as you go up, 240 to be exact at tier 8, which brings it in line with some of the medium tanks, and so you're almost like a very fast medium tank. However, the tier 8 unfortunately has a top speed of 58 kilometers an hour, and that is maximum as a tier 8, which means that as a light tank you're not particularly the fastest, and this is probably where it gets the most painful, I'd say, because you get an increased size of the tank, you go slower, and the alpha damage, although being pretty decent, is not really comparable to some of the tanks at the tier, and you're going to be getting smacked very easily by a lot of the tier 8 heavy tanks and anything that has kind of a 90mm gun or higher to be able to really take you out very easily. Health points of the tank are 920, making it one of the lowest within the category at tier 8, and so yeah, not particularly looking great in that regard either, but that's kind of what we want to see with some of these tanks. We need them to be balanced. This is the key thing that Wargaming need to get right with these vehicles. And obviously in the gameplay behind this video you can see the speed at which the EBR 105 is going, and that is obviously the tier 10. But before we get to the actual statistics of the tier 10, let's have a look at the EBR 90, which is the tier 9, and this is really kind of what amps you up for the tier 10 when you get it. You really do have that similar sort of playstyle. You still have 240 alpha damage as opposed to the 390 that you get with the EBR 105, but you get pretty mediocre penetration, so a lot of the time you're going to be wanting to fire premium rounds, but even then, because it is heat rounds, you're going to be detracking a lot of people and dealing no damage if you do hit into the sides of the tanks that you're going to be facing, and so the penetration becomes a little bit of a problem, making them slightly more difficult to play for probably the average player of World of Tanks. And so yeah, I think that it is an interesting kind of topic to discuss within the game. And obviously, what do you actually think about the French wheeled vehicles? Have you seen them before? Have you watched lots of gameplay? There's loads and loads of them on YouTube, and of course I think the key characteristics of these tanks is that they're just so fast to the point where you find it very difficult to be able to actually take them out of the game, and so yeah, it's very difficult for you to be able to do that. And that's kind of where they avoid damage rather than trying to not take damage. You're basically just trying to avoid it entirely rather than bounce any rounds with the armor, because obviously you don't get any armor with these tanks, and so HE rounds are probably your worst nightmare if someone decides to load them. However, because you're so fast and HE rounds have pretty useless shell velocity, you're not going to be able to actually hit anyone with your HE rounds. You can see here the shell velocity between the standard rounds 1150 and the HE nearly 300 meters a second lower, 30% lower, so it's going to be very hard to hit these sort of tanks with HE, so that's kind of the, I guess, once again, just trying to avoid taking that damage even further. Obviously, you can see here the view range of the tank is pretty mediocre, 330 meters for a tier 9 French light tank is very low, although, you know, the key thing about these tanks is you need to be up close and personal, and you're going to be the front line spotter, and so I guess that's what you want to be using on console to be able to really push forward your damage numbers and also the assistance damage, especially if you're trying to go for the marks of excellence on these vehicles, since you can probably be one of the first if you do decide to actually get up the tech tree line as fast as possible within the game. Obviously, fantastic replay behind. You can see the amount of assistance damage and actual damage that has been done within the game, but let's have a look at the statistics of the vehicle and showcase why this tank is just unbelievable within the game. So obviously you're seeing the tank reach 90 kilometers an hour on PC, and that's because of all of the boosts that you can put onto the tank. You can effectively increase the speed of the tank using some of the bounty equipment along with the field modifications that we don't have access to. However, because we are on console and we have the speed boost equipment means that yes, we can actually increase the speed even further, and whether or not that will be the case, I don't know, but we'll have to wait and see. However, 390 alpha damage on a light tank is very, very nice. It's not an autoloader, so no, you will not be able to clip anything with this tank. So don't go thinking that you'll be able to automatically lock onto people and just circle them and be able to pen them loads of times in quick succession with an autoloader, because they don't have one. And I guess that's the kind of trade-off between these light tanks and the original light tanks from the French line. Obviously, with these tanks, the dispersion is disgusting, so you're not going to be able to hit on the move very reliably with this. However, when you can do 70 kilometers an hour, you can get up close and personal and out-traverse a lot of the tanks within the game. And you also notice that the tank traverse of these is fairly consistent, where you can really swing your tank around. These things turn in an absolute instant, and you can do almost a full 180 in just a matter of a second. So this is where the tanks really come into effect, and why they're so hated on World of Tanks PC is just because they are so quick, to the point where it's not necessarily, you don't have to necessarily be a skilled driver to be able to actually avoid the majority of hits, and also the turning speed makes it very difficult for any heavy tanks that have to deal with these circling them to be able to actually effectively take them out of the game. Obviously, hit points are pretty poor. 1300 means that, yeah, that's one of the lowest, if not the lowest health tier 10 within the game, and rightly so. When you've got pretty much everything else within the game, then you really shouldn't be having much more hit points. Obviously, I think it's down to what your kind of playstyle is. Are you a typical light tank driver, and whether Wargaming balance these correctly within the game to make them actually somewhat consistent with the current meta of the game. Obviously, fast tanks do very well on console because often you can avoid taking damage because you're fast, and I think that this is only going to amplify it, and I'm really hoping Wargaming console can manage to balance these, because Wargaming PC have not done a good job, and yeah, I don't really trust them to be able to do it properly. So fingers crossed that the tanks aren't going to be absolutely broken within the game, and hopefully you've enjoyed this little bit of a different one where we've looked through the tech tree line before it's arrived, given a little bit of an overview, and showcased what the tanks are going to be like, obviously with the gameplay in the background from the What Replays website. Hopefully it's been a good one, and I hope that you leave your comments as to what you think about the French-wheeled light tanks coming to World of Tanks console, and whether it is a bad decision by Wargaming to do so. Obviously, if you enjoy the video, like the video, and have a look at some of the others on the channel to see if you like those too, and maybe you'll want to subscribe, and I hope that you'll join me in one of those videos very, very soon.